Okay, so today we're going to start on Chav Tes Amud Aleph, Roi Vechad Ba'oif. It's it's not on a traditional Gemara. It's the middle of the page, but it's not really the middle of the page because the bottom half is all wide lines, and the top is all thin lines. Okay, we thank Hashem that's able to learn Torah every day. In this course of our learning, we should have Beis Hamikdash immediately. The Mishnah we learned that if someone shechs a bird, he shechs the majority of one siman by the bird, that's already good. Then we said, Rabbi said, no, you have to shech the vridin. Then it says the majority of one by a bird is good, and the majority of both of them by an animal is good. So it repeated this concept of roi vechad is going to work. So the Gemara now says, roi vechad ba'if, the majority of one by a bird is good. It says, Tanina chadazimna. The Mishnah is quoting, it starts off at the end of the Mishnah, that roi vechad ba'if is good. The majority of one works. You don't need to shech the entire siman. You can just shech the majority. And then it goes back and it says, but you told me already before that rubai shalachad is good enough. Kamaya. So in the same Mishnah it said it twice. Why did you have to say it twice? So the Gemara says Hakash Pashach Siman. That's an acronym for the names of the rabbis that are going to be quoted discussing this question. The first one is going to be with a Hey. His name is Rav Hoshea. Then we're going to have a Rav Kahana. That's the Kaf. We're going to have a Shin, which is going to be Rav Simi Barashi. Then we're going to have a Rav Papa. Then we're going to have a Rav Ashi. That's going to be a Shin. And the Ches, I don't think we know who that's referring to, the last. So it starts off, answer number one. Amar Rabbi Ishia, Chad b'chulim, Chad b'kachim. The reason why it repeats it twice is because one is talking about a regular animal, one's talking about kachim, an animal of sacrifice. Utzricha. And we have to have both of these statements regarding both of them for both context. It has to say that the majority is good in each context. The reason for that is the Yashmin Chulin, if would say the majority is good by a regular mundane animal, by the Shechita, Hasam who the Sagale Berub over there, it's good enough to have the majority. Why Mishum Delav L'Damatzar? Because over there, he doesn't need the blood. He just has to sever the simanim. If it's a bird, so it's one siman. I will catch him del damatzarech, but when it comes to a sacrifice, where the whole purpose of the shechting of it is in order to take the blood, and you're going to use the blood and sprinkle it. Maybe you have to do a shechita on the entire neck, on the entire on all the simanim, because you have to be able to get all the blood out. If you only do majority, you're not getting all the blood. So because by kachim you need to get the blood, that's the whole purpose. You have to do a much bigger shechita. So adika kula, you have to shech the entire thing. Brave would not work. That's why it has to tell me that by kachim rave works. Yes, meaning kachim, and if it would only tell me that kachim, that rave works, mishum del damatzarech. Because by kachim, you need the blood. Abulchon del damatzarechim palgas agilei. Could have thought that maybe even half is good. You don't even need the majority. So kamash malan to tell me that you need the majority by both kachim and chulin. So Rav Hoshea's teretz is the reason why it says twice that the majority is good is because one is referring to kachim and one is referring to chulin. We're asked hey b'chulin hey b'kachim. Which quote, which part of the Mishnah was referring to chulin? Which part was referring to kachim? It's the same line twice. But which one is which? Amar of Kana. This would be the second name that we're quoting here. That would be for the siman that we gave before. If Kana says mistabra reisha b'chulin v'seifa b'kachim. So it's more logical to say that we start off with chulin, the first reference of the majority is good, rather than the second reference of the majority is good. So we start off with chulin. Mimai, how do you know that? It says mi diktani sheichet, because if we look at the beginning of the Mishnah, it says sheichet echad ba'if shnayim b'meim shchitas k'sheira. And then it says v'rubei shalachet kamei, the majority is good enough. So it starts off with the word hasheichet. So it says like this. If we were talking about kachim, then hamaylik mi ba'ilei. It shouldn't have said hasheichet. It should have said hamaylik, because by kachim you do malika as opposed to shchita. Elamai. So the Gemara says, okay, let's see. Seifa bekachim. So basically, what you're telling me is that the end of the Mishnah is going to be talking about kachim because the beginning was kuntabit kachim because it says hashaychet. Hashaychet must be chulin. So it must be the end of the Mishnah is kachim. So shchitasei k'sheira. Why does it say at the end of the Mishnah it says shchitasei k'sheira? Last two words of the Mishnah that we had on 27a. That shchitasei k'sheira. It's 1 second. Malikasi k'sheira mi b'ayle. It should have said that the malika's kasha. Basically, we say hashaychet in the beginning, we say hashaychet at the end. So if you say hashaychet doesn't work, because that would be just a mundane animal, so then why does it say hashaychet at the end if it's if the end was talking about kachim? So it's all kasha. That's not a question. The fact that it says at the end, shchitas k'sheira, because I did the salak mi behema taninami shchitas k'sheira. See, the last case of the Mishnah was if you shech the majority of a bird, of one siman by a bird, or if you shech the majority of both simanim by an animal, shchitas k'sheira. Now, by an animal, we know that it's going to be shchita. There's no malika on an animal. There's malika is only on a bird. So because you finished off saying Rav Shnayim bebehema, then you have to say shchitas k'sheira. Okay? So that's why it could be talking about kachim, and it says shchita anyway, because it's dealing with the animal. So it says ela reisha, but if you want to say that the teretz in the reisha, michti. Aleif kai, we're talking about a bird. Isal kadaitach bekachim. If we'd be talking about kachim, about a carbon, hamaylik mi baile, should have started off with saying hamaylik. Well, that's not so simple because it says hashaychet echad ba'ayif v'shnayim bebehema. What should it have said? Hamaylik echad ba'ayif hashaychet shnayim bebehema. She could have used two words. Okay, so it would have used two different terms. Or maybe because it's starting off with the bird, it should have said hamaylik. Okay, that was the pshat of Rish Lakish with Rav Kana's interpretation of which one is which. Rav Simon Barashi Amaresha B'chulin Mehacha. Simon Barashi is not giving a different pshat, but he's giving a different interpretation of rather than Rav Kana. Rav Kana said that we're starting off with chulin. The first reference was chulin, the second one was kachim, and he gave a proof for that because of the word shchita as opposed to malika. Sim Barashi says, I'll give you another proof. Why we're starting off with chulin. It says diktani echad ba'if. It says start off sheichet echad ba'if. So one siman by a bird. Isal kadaitak b'kachim. If we'd be talking about kachim, there's two birds. There's two possibilities of offering birds. One is a chatas, one is an oila. If it would be an oila, if it would be a chatas, then you're right. You only have to do malik on one siman. But if it's an oila, then you have to shecht both simanim. So 1 second, how could you say echad ba'oif? If we're dealing with kachim, you have the other carbon, you have the oila, which needs both simanim. Elamai seifa bekachim. So I wonder what I want to say. That's the case. So then the seifa has to be kachim because the teretz that Rish Lakish gave was Rish Lakish. Rav Hashia, the teretz that Rav Hashia gave was that one was chulin, one was kachim. So if the reisha isn't chulin, then the seifa. If the reisha isn't kachim, then the seifa has to be kachim. What does it say? It says reiv echad ba'if. It says the same thing. Hayika ayla seif to b'shnei simanim.
Okay? Ganav? Really? No,
but you have the seifa, which says the same thing. It says reiv echad ba'if. What about the ayla seif to b'shnei simanim? So it says my reiv echad. What does it mean reiv echad? So we're going to answer this problem. It says reiv kol echad v'echad. We don't mean the majority of one because you really can't we can't be satisfied with one because you need two because we're talking about an ayla. But we mean the majority of one. It means the majority of each one. Yeah, that's what it means. Reiv echad means reiv kol echad v'echad. We didn't list the reiv shnayim. We could have said the majority of both. But given the kachatas, the sagli b'chad siman, but we know that there's an oila and there's a chatas. Chatas, you only have to shecht one siman. Oila, you have to shecht both simanim. So, shemachi But so because there's also a chatas, shemachi le psikale, that's why it wasn't so clear regarding, it didn't say reiv kol echad, because we're also dealing with a chatas, which only has one. So we just said reiv echad. And that would apply to both of them. The majority of one is satisfactory. By a chatas, it's actually the majority of one. And by the oila would be the majority of each one. Okay. Now, Rav Papa comes in place of the Rav Kana and Rav Simi Barashi that are telling me, how do we know that the Reisha is Chulin and the Seifa is Kachim? This is all based on Rav Hoshi's teretz. Rav Papa am Reisha b'Chulin mehacha. Rav Papa says that we know that the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about the Chulin and the Seifa would be talking about Kachim. Diktani, Rabbi Daimer, Rabbi says, at Sheish Cheres Avridin. They have to shech, they have to also sever the arteries. The pliger Rabbanan Allah. And the Rabbanan argue. Why? It's only Rabbi Yehuda that says you have to sever the arteries. If we're dealing with chulin, then we understand why there's a machlekes here between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Do you have to sever the arteries or not? But if we're dealing with a carbon, then why would the Rabbanan argue on Rabbi Yehuda, who he atzmi ladam v'tzarech? The whole carbon is only to get the blood. What are you going to do? You're going to shech the animal and not get the blood? Of course, you have to cut the so there shouldn't be any machlekes if it's talking about kachim. Must be it's talking about chulin. Okay? Rav Ashi Amar Seifa b'kachim mihacha. Rav Ashi takes the other approach. He says, I'm going to prove it to you that the Seifa is dealing with kachim. Diktani hasheichet shnei rashim ke'echad shchitasik ksheira. Well, Rav Ashi does is he jumps to the next Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amud Beis. The Daf Lamed Amud Beis. See, originally when they printed when the Mishnah was written, it was an entire prakim. Then when they printed the Gemara, so they took segments of the discussion and they divided up the Mishnayos. But originally all the Mishnayos were all in one flow. So you could match the next Mishnah to the Mishnah before. It would be matching. It's only the way our printer divided it up to help us, so we shouldn't have like this massive Mishnah, and then Gemara would go on for pages, and we won't remember what we learned back there. So it divided it up. It put a segment of Gemara on each piece. But really, the Mishnayos are connected. So Rav Ashi is saying that the end of the previous Mishnah is connected to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah says that if someone shechs two heads together, shchitasik ksheira. Shech, you put two animals together, and you shech. It says hasheichet l'chatchilalai. Hasheichet di'evedin l'chatchilalai. That means it says hasheichet, someone that did that. That means that it's only b'di'eved. But l'chatchila, you shouldn't do it. Just 1 second. I have to pause for a second. I have to see if I have to. Just 1 second. Okay. So, Mishnah said, that's only b'di'eved. If you shech two heads together, it's only b'di'eved. L'chatchila you can't. If we're dealing with the end of the Mishnah, end of the previous Mishnah, which means the beginning of the new Mishnah, is the Mishnah we didn't get to yet, is dealing with kachim. That's why we know that l'chatchila you're not allowed to shech two heads together. It's only b'di'eved. Mishum detani Rabbi Yosef, as Rabbi Yosef taught tizbach. It says in the pasuk that you should slaughter. Tizbach is a singular verb that you in the singular, thou should slaughter. That means that you shouldn't have two people doing the same action. That would be like two people holding onto the knife. Then it says tizbachuhu. This is a how do you say? There's two types of singular verbs. One is there's the subject is singular. One is the object is singular. The subject would be that there's only one person doing the action, versus the object is singular, is that you're slaughtering it. It's one slaughtering. It's not two. It's not slaughtering two objects. So tizbachuhu shlo yehei echad sheichet shnei zvachim. You shouldn't have one person, one subject, slaughtering two karbanos. Okay, now this is dealing with kachim. So by kachim, we know that you're not allowed to do this. So therefore, the Mishnah that says that only b'di'eved, that b'di'eved it's kosher, that's because the chatchila you're not allowed to. Okay. That would be that's the answer of Rav Ashi. Now, really, the next, so if you go back, we had a siman of each of the names. We had a hey, a chaf, a shin, a pei, which Rav Papa, now the shin would be Rav Ashi. Now we should have a lamed or something, but in the end we have a ches. So I think there may be either mistake in it. Usually it says what the siman would be. Yeah, he doesn't say. Oh, he says perhaps it was originally the letter Shin representing Reb Shimon ben Lakish. The last letter, this is the note of the Steinsaltz. The last letter of the mnemonic Ches does not represent any of the Amiram who expressed an opinion in the ensuing discussion. Perhaps it was originally the letter Shin representing Reb Shimon ben Lakish. It's funny how a Shin would turn into a Ches. Strange. All right. It says like this. Rish Lakish also holds that the beginning of the Mishnah is referring to Chulin. Basically, everyone's saying this, that we have two statements that say the same thing. Why do we need them? We need one is to tell me that the majority is good, applies to Chulin, and it also applies to Kachim. But which one was which? So we said the first one is Chulin. Rish Lakish also holds the first one is Chulin. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, he asked this question. He says, once we say that Rubi Shalachad Kamayo, no, Rubi Shalachad Kamayo is the beginning of the Mishnah. Lama Shaninu Reivechad by Reif Shnaim Bebeim. So why does it have to say that the majority of one is good enough? Fisha Shaninu Hivi Olayas a Tamid Kartz Merik Acher Shkitasi Yod Yachli Merki Apostle Chachsinu Reivechad by Reif Shnaim Bebeim. Based on a Mishnah in Yuma, the Mishnah says that the Kohen Gadol has a lot of things that he has to do. He has to do a shechita, because on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol does the whole service on his own. So he does a shechita, and then he has to be the one to catch the blood as well. Now, that's a little complicated. So what he would do is he would shech the majority, pass the knife to someone else. He would grab the vessel that catches the blood, and then he would immediately do that. So the expression over here is, it says, we have a mission that says, he violayas at tamid. They bring to him the tamid. Kartzai. Kartzai means he cuts it. He does the beginning of the shechita. Umeirak acher shchitasei al yadei. And someone else, meirak acher means someone else completes it, completes it, the shechita for him. Al yadei means on his behalf. So yachal leimerak yipasel. Maybe if the other person doesn't finish it, then the animal would be pasul. That's why we had to teach that the majority of one siman is good, and the majority of two by a bird, and the majority of two simanim is good for is good by an animal. Now that's coming to teach me that you don't need to finish it off b'di'evet. You finish off the shechita, you get the full simanim, and someone else can do that. Even though we said that you're not allowed to pause, but that would only be a pause for the amount of time it takes to do a full shechita. Here you'd pass the knife and he just finishes it. Okay, so now Amar Mar the master taught, means we taught Yochel Leimeraki Puzzle. I could have thought that maybe if you don't finish off the shchita, it should be puzzle. And I need to have the both simanim. That's what Rish Lakish is saying is that the chiddush of the Mishnah is that I could have thought that you need to have the full, both simanim full, completely, not roiv. I could have thought that you need kulai. And who would do the kulai? The Kohen Gadol does the majority. The rest of it would be done by someone else. So I could have thought that that's ma'akiv. The other person's the finishing off the shechita is ma'akiv. He says, 1 second. That's the case on top of page 29b. Then you're using someone else other than the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur to do the service. And we know that you don't do that. The entire Yom Kippur service is done by the Kohen Gadol. Yeah, if I would say that the person finishing off the shechita on behalf of the Kohen Gadol was really necessary, was essential, then that would ruin the other halacha that you don't use anyone else on Yom Kippur. So how could I have thought that it's essential, and I need our Mishnah to tell me that it's kosher anyway, it's not essential? I never would have thought that. So I don't need the Mishnah. It's a Zachi Kamar, no. I could have said like this. Could have thought that there's a rabbinic law that says that you have to finish it. Could have thought that there's a rabbinic law that you have to finish off the shechita. That's what we say, that even rabbinically there's no problem with that. As long as you did the majority, even rabbinically it's good. So now, this goes both ways. So now, if you accept what we're saying now, that you don't even have a rabbinic law that you need to finish off the shechita, so then why do we do it at all? The Gemara says, mitzvah l'marek. There is a mitzvah to finish it off. No, you have to see Rashi here. Rashi says, mitzvah l'marek mishum dam, to get all of the blood. Now, Rashi he goes on, he says, Bani Shamati, I don't know if you have a traditional Gemara. Rashi says, I heard the Yuma, that this explanation in Yuma is Mishum Berevam Hadros Melech. Says that it's good to use a lot of people. It's called Revam, with the multitude of people. Hadros Melech, it's a glory for the king. It says V'le'inli bikach. What's the base of it? Ainli bi Omer kach. My heart doesn't say that this is correct. He says, because then we should do by all the Avodas, we should have someone else there. But we know that we don't do that because we need the Kohen Gadol. And we send everyone else away in certain places. I wrote last time we learned this, maybe the time before that, we I have on the side of the Gemara, it says from the Rashba that since the pshat in this, an explanation for this pshat that Rashi is bringing, which doesn't really fit with the Rashi saying, it doesn't fit. It says, how could you have Revam Hadros Melech on Yom Kippur when we know that we don't use anyone else? It says maybe it's specifically by shechita, because shechita isn't really an avoda, because shechita ksher bizarre. So once shechita is not considered an avoda, then maybe I have something here that's not an avoda that I should be able to get a Berevam Hadros Melech in, so I sneak it in by the shechita. They get someone else to do part of it. Interesting. We're holding by the 2 dots on Chaf Tes Amud Beis 29b. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish Mishum Levi Saba. Shimon ben Lakish says in the name of Levi the elder. This may be Levi Rebbe's Talmud, one that limped, if you remember. Maybe the father of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. He says like this: when you do a shechita, so at a certain point you pass over the line that makes it kosher. The beginning of the shechita is cutting, And it only becomes kosher at the majority. So he says all of that preliminary shechita is not considered shechita. It's only as it goes over that line to get to the point, that's the shechita. If there would be electronically, it would beep. So you passed. Rabbi Yochanan says no. The shechita is a process. It starts from the beginning of the shechita and it continues all the way through. We're just going to discuss what's the nafkamina, but let's see. Amar Rava, Hakol Maidim. Rava says that both would agree. Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. It's a possible difference we could have said was that, let's say there's two people that did the shechita. First person was invalid, was a non-Jew. The second person that finished it was the Jew. If you hold that the shechita is only at the end, so the preliminary parts wasn't necessary to be by a Jew, so good. And then the Jew grabs the knife at the end and does the last bit, so then we would say that it's good, right? That's what we would think. However, if you hold that the shechita is from the beginning to the end, then we would say that part of the shechita isn't kosher. We would say that it's puzzle. He says no. Rava says everyone agrees that the shechita over here is going to be puzzle. Why? If the shechita is only at the end, so why is it puzzle at the beginning? It says like this, because shari psula, shari nasaba maisa treifa b'yadei v'kechavim. Because the animal becomes a treifa in the hands of the Ovid Kechavim. Now, I have a question on this, because if he's cutting the trachea first, then it doesn't become a treifa. It doesn't become a treifa. No. We're dealing with an animal. So that's the test. If it would have been a bird, we only shecht one siman, then it actually wouldn't have been a treifa by the Ovid Kechavim, because when the Ovid Kechavim did half, so then it's not a trachea yet, because half the trachea, the animal could still live. But we're dealing with an animal. That means the Ovid Kechavim did the entire trachea. And then there comes along the yid and he does the veshet, he does the esophagus. So in this case, the guy made it into a treifa, and it's not considered a shechita. See, when it's a shechita, so it says, yeah, it goes through, as it's happening, it goes through a treifa stage, but it goes directly, since it's all a shechita, so it's all a shechita. It's no problem. But since you're dividing it up in the first part, we're saying is not considered a shechita. The second part is going to be the shechita. So that means that the first part was a treifa. Okay. Rava also says that, let's say there's a halacha by the Oila Sa'if, you have to do the malika above the chut sikra, above the red line on the altar. There's a midline, equator on the mizbeach that tells you where's the midway point. So when you do the malika, you're supposed to stand on the sevis, do it above. So for the Oila Sa'if, the blood is placed above the red line, and the malika is done there as well. Now, if a person did the malika, he starts it below the red line, and then he does the second part of it, the second half above the red line, he says that would also not be kosher, because what you did below the red line, that was a valid malika for a chatas. And since that would be valid for a chatas, so we're going to consider it a complete action, even though for the oila you need more than that, but it would still would consider a complete action, and that would be possible. So loy nechlekan, we're looking for where is the nafkamina, where's the machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Loy nechlekan kein shachat siman echad b'chutz v'siman echad b'fnim. Happened was the animal that we're shechting was actually outside the temple. He started to do a shechita, and while you're doing the shechita, you bring the animal in and finish it. Because someone shouts out to the kohen, he says, "Hey, you're in the wrong place." So he says, "Oh, okay." And he moves over. He comes inside the courtyard. According to the opinion that says that the shechita is from beginning to the end, then mechayev is going to be chayev because of shchuti chutz. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal outside the temple, a sacrifice outside the temple. He's going to be chayev because he did half the shechita outside, and that's considered shechita. The man damer einel shechita al b'soif, but according to the opinion that says that the real shechita is only the end of the shechita, then lay mechayev. The end of the shechita, where the shechita really is effective, that end, that was inside. Amalei Rabba Barsimi. Rabba Barsimi says to Rava, Marla Yamarachi, the master did not teach the way you're teaching it. We have a machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi, you're saying that the machlekes is only in a certain case. Says the master didn't say that. Now, who's the master? Manu Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the master. Now, it happens to be that we know Abaya learned by Rabbi Yosef, but Rava also learned by Rabbi Yosef. They both learned by Rabba, and they were by Rabbi Yosef. So, I think let's assume that. I'm not sure if it says it clearly. Let's assume that Rava learned by Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says the following: Rabbi Yosef says that the machlekes is also when you did half the shechita outside the temple and half the shechita inside, because that's the divrei hakol. Because what did he do outside? You did what would have been invalid for a chatas oif. Right? Chatas oif, you do the malika. Well, actually, there's a little detail here that if you do malika outside the temple, you're not actually chayiv. It's only when you do the shechita. It's only when you do the shechita outside the temple that you're chayiv for shchuti chutz. Even though the bird is supposed to get malika. The bird is supposed to get malika, but malika outside the temple is really nothing. Malika only works in the temple. So when you're doing when you're trying to violate the shchuti chutz, so wants to do the avera perfectly, then he needs to do a shechita outside the temple. So if he's sheichet outside the temple, a sheichet one siman, then Rabbi Yosef would say that everyone would agree that he's chayiv because he did one siman, which that would be valid for a chatas oif. The sin offering bird, even though what he's dealing with here is an oila seif. But leinechlaku, so where would the machlekes be according to Rabbi Yosef? You shechted both simanim, the minimal amount outside, and then you completed it inside. It can't be a full siman. It had to be, you did it somehow a little sideways. And it would not be a valid shechita for any animal because it was only the minimal amount of both which isn't acceptable for any animal. Okay, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that holds that the entire shechita is a shechita mechayev. Then you're going to be chayev for shchuti chutz, for slaughtering an animal outside because you started it outside. According to the opinion that says that the shechita is only at the end, then lay mechayev, because the end was done correctly. Okay. Maseches Reb Zera. Reb Zera asks the question. It says, Kolo iskim bepara mitchila vad seif metamen begadim u'paistan oisa b'malacha acheres. The rule is that when it comes to the paraduma, everyone that's involved with the paraduma, their clothing become contaminated. They have to go wash their clothing. They have to go to the mikveh and put their clothing as well in the mikveh. That's the rule. It says it's based on Rashi quotes that it's based on the pasuk that says the hyssop, the cedar wood, the hyssop, the red strand is thrown into the burning para, and then it says right afterwards, and the kohen should wash his clothing. We learn from that all of those people that were doing those things have to wash their clothing. Okay, now another halacha about the paraduma. is that if someone that's involved in the paraduma does any other work while he's dealing with the paraduma, he invalidates it. If the sheichet of the paraduma he shechs the paraduma, and while he's shechting it, he said, you know what, let me save some time. I also want to cut up some squash and I use this nice shchita knife to cut my squash. So he puts the squash next to that, and he does shchita like that. He cuts the squash together. The knife is obviously a little bit longer. So he says that would invalidate the paraduma. Okay, so now, Ir b'psul b'shchitasa, bein kaidem psula, bein lacher psula, eino metamim begadim. If something goes wrong with the shchita, Rashi says what goes wrong is that it becomes a nevela. So you messed up the shchita so badly that it's not even considered a shchita. Now, there's people that were doing services here with the whether anything was done before the shchita or whether the services were done after the shchita, they don't have to wash their clothing because it's not a paraduma. It was messed up so close to the beginning, it's nothing. However, one second. If it's something gets messed up by the sprinkling, you're supposed to sprinkle the blood 7 times in front of the entrance. You're on the other mountain, but towards the entrance, Beis Hamikdash, you sprinkle the blood. If something gets messed up over there, so then if the people that were doing the service of this if we're talking about the people that were there before it became invalid, they do have to wash their clothing because it's a paraduma, even though something got messed up, but nevertheless, and everyone that's involved has to wash their clothing. If they did something after the puzzle sprinkling, then they don't have to wash their clothing. So now, Reb Zeir's question goes like this: if there's a shchita is a long process, like Rabbi Yechanan holds, liflignam b'shchitasa, then we should also divide up the shchita as well. We should say like this: Irba psul b'shchita kaidem psula mitam begadim. The person that was doing the shchita before the psul, so his clothing should become tam because that was also considered a shchita. That was considered a service. But lacher psula, then ain't mitam begadim. This question is that if the shechita takes a long time, then you should have a before and an after. And during that time, you should have during that time because it's prolonged. There's a long shechita here, so there's before the psul and after the psul. And before the psul, his clothing should become tamei. Amar Rava says niskalkala shechita kamnet. You're talking about a shchita that becomes invalid. Shani Hasan degleim Muslim afraid lav shchita klal. No one says that the shchita is good until the end, and then all the beginning shchitas were beginning processes of the shchita are all good until the end. That last part wasn't good, and you need that last part now. What we say is that if the last part isn't good, then the whole shchita is not good. Retroactively, we see that there was no shchita at all. No one says that even though the shchita is prolonged, it's from the beginning to the end. No one says that the first parts are kosher, even if the last part isn't kosher. If it all goes on the last part, we just say that the beginning was also part of it. But if the last part ends up being puzzle, then the whole thing is puzzle. Amar Rava, so Reb Zeir tried to ask a question here. Rava says that's not a question. That's not. You're basing it on an assumption that there's kosher parts of the shechita before the shechita got messed up, and those parts remain kosher. It's just the end part isn't. It says no. Rava says ikashli hakasli. If I would ask a question on these yeshin l'shechita mitchilavat seif, I would ask a different question. I would ask the following question. According to the opinion Rish Lakish, I would ask on Rish Lakish the question. Go like this: Hakashali. According to the opinion of Rish Lakish, that says the shechita is only at the end. Lifleg bechshera depara. There should be a machlekes, not machlekes. There should be a division, and when the para becomes kosher, in the validity of the para, going to shachta betray gavri. The gavra kama le matama, the gavra basar matama. Should make a division here between if there's two people that are doing the shechita, then the first person that's at the beginning doesn't become tamei, but the one afterwards becomes tamei. And we should have said this. Should have said that when we start dividing, we start making a contrast between when the person's tamei, when not. We should have had one more case of that the first person, the person that does the beginning of the shechita should not be tamei. It's only the person that does the second half of the shechita should be tamei. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says about this. Says to him, this is by Rava, probably learned by Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is responding to him. Says, Trey Gavri Bechad Zivcha Kamret. What are you saying? You want to have two people doing the shechita by a karban? Barmine Dahi. You have to exclude that case. The Tanina, because we learned in a Mishnah, a Brisa, probably a Mishnah. Tizbach, Shloi Yiyu Shnayim Sheichtim Zebach Echad. You can't have two people doing one karban. We had quoted on Amar Aleph. Quoted actually this was a brisa that Rabbi Yosef taught. Tizbachuhu, you slaughter it. That one person can't slaughter two sacrifices together. How did I miss that in the last? I missed it in the last on the other page. It kind of says that you look at the way that it's written, not the way it's read. It says bachu, who would be a plural. But we don't want the plural. But because it doesn't have the vav there, it's not tizbachu hu. It says tizbach hu. We're going to read it tizbachehu, even though it's pronounced tizbachuhu. Rav Kana says that you look at the way that it's written, not the way that it's read. It's called yesh aim lemasiris. You follow the way that it's that the letters are, not the way that you pronounce it, not the way the vowels are. I like to say that when you have an article, you have Jefferson here. What's Jefferson? You have an article of say an apple, not a apple, because whenever you have a vowel, so you say an. So what do you do by hour? You say an hour or a hour. So if you look at the way that it's written, then it really should be I'll see you in a hour. But if you do it the way it's pronounced, no one says hour, because it's pronounced. It's the H is a consonant, not a vowel. We say I'll see you in an hour. So that we hold Yeshem Lemikra in English. We hold Yeshem Lemikra. But here we're going to go Yeshem Lemasayos. We're going to look at the way that the letters are, not the way that it's. Anyway, so Rabbi Yosef says you can't have two people doing it anyway. If you're asking that that Mishnah should have divided it up and said the Mishnah in Parah should have said another scenario of where one person is going to become tummy, the other person won't. Says that's not possible because you don't do it like that. Amalei Abaya says Lavitmar Allah. 1 second. Abaya says to Rabbi Yosef, don't we say about that? Amar Rabba Bar Bachanam Rabbi Yechon Zutiv Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon Stimasa. The fact that was said anonymously, that's because it's Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon that has anonymous Mishnayos. Some of his Mishnayos are anonymous. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. We think he's possibly a Talmud of Reb Meir. No, that's Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's son. Stimasa that Avol Chachamim, the Chachamim say, no, you can have two people slaughtering one karban. Can stop in middle. And according to the Rabbanan, the Mishnah should have had another scenario. Should have listed a case where one person becomes tamei and one person doesn't. Where it says even according to Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon, that says that that's impossible. But we could also divide it. In the Sheikh Echad Gavra B'Shnei Sudrim, so the Kamalei Matam, so the Vasar Matam. Where it's getting very creative here. Where it says, let's say the sheikhet of the paraduma changed his clothes in middle of the shchita. I would assume that he's wearing his jacket like over the shoulders, like the Israelis like to wear their jacket. They don't put their sleeves in. They like to walk in the street like that. They balance the jacket, and they like that. So he knocks it off, and at the beginning of the shchita, and someone puts on him another jacket. Hey, I got to wear a jacket for the shchita. So he puts on him a different jacket. So the first one, should be if you hold yeshna l'shchita mitchila vad seif, the first one should be tamei. But if you hold ein l'shchita el b'seif, then only the second one should be tamei. The first one should not be tamei. We have a contrast. We have another distinction that we could have said in the Mishnah. Ela bepsula de para kamari bechsher lekamar. We're talking about what invalidates the para. We weren't talking about a paraduma that's going to be kosher. We're talking about a paraduma that's going to be puzzle. That's why that Mishnah. So these scenarios that you're quoting now is not what the Mishnah was discussing directly. So you can't ask a kasha. It should have been talking about it. That wasn't its topic. Okay, let's leave it over here. We're holding my Maseches Ravidi and Daf Lamed. Okay. Shakayach.